there was a psionic summoning operation being operated experimentally at Rendlesham at this time.
What's going on, team? Is anybody able to keep up with the craziness that's going on in UFO world right now? I think we're all just on information overload. Yesterday we had an awesome live stream for Weird Week, and I have to say I'm really loving the chance to interact with you guys and just have some fun and have a laugh. I think this whole topic needs to just lighten up a little bit sometimes because it can be dark, it can be very weird and strange. So I think it's good to balance it out and have some fun, and I'm really enjoying that. But yesterday, after the stream finished, I decided to put my feet up, treat myself a little bit, fire up a little bit of RuneScape, relax. And when I did, Ross Coulthart just happened to be live with a Q&A on NewsNation. So of course, I tuned in, and my God, he dropped a bomb that just I was not expecting and just really makes you question history, and that more and more each day it begins to feel like our consensus of reality is entirely managed and manipulated. Before we get into Roscoe's nukes though, my name is Josh and welcome to Polarity. If you like talking aliens, UFOs, consciousness, then please consider subscribing because you are in the right place, my friend. So let's check out the first clip here. We're going to get to the Rendlesham stuff in a moment. But let's check out the first clip here because we actually got a little update on the Age of Disclosure documentary that's meant to be coming out sometime soon.
My question is, what has happened to the Age of Disclosure documentary with Lou Elizondo? It seems to have never been released, fallen off the face of the earth, and no one's talking about this. There's also been no updates from Lou. Ross, can you fill us in? What do you know? What's happened and why? Thank you.
Okay, so there was a premiere of the Age of Disclosure documentary at the South by Southwest Festival, and the producer, who is one of the co-executive producers on Age of Disclosure, Dan Farrar, the other executive producer is actually Lou Elizondo.
Wait, what? What? The executive producer, the co-executive producer of the Age of Disclosure is that guy. This big UFO documentary that's going to blow the lid off things is co-produced by that guy. Brother, I don't know how I feel about that. That's not a good look for this documentary right now. But look, I want to let Ross finish and we can talk about this after.
Southwest Festival, and the Age of Disclosure, Dan Farrar, the other executive producer, is actually Lou Elizondo. The producer, Dan Farrar, made it very, very clear that he would be seeking ideally a cinematic release or some kind of streaming release. And sadly, these things take time. You have to find a cinema chain or indeed a streamer that is prepared to pay the money to run the documentary.
I mean, it takes time, but it doesn't take that much time, right? I mean, we don't even have a date yet. The movie's been finished for ages. It premiered like 2 months ago, and we still don't even have a date. This, to me, is not about trying to find a streaming service or a cinema who wants to take it. In this NewsNation interview, Ross actually says that the UFO topic has had by far the most interest that any story he's ever covered in his entire journalistic career by the public. He said, the amount of that people are interested in this and they want to know is just beyond anything. And we all know that these streaming companies and cinemas, they're going to play and put on whatever's going to bring the people in. Right? That's how they make their money. They want what the people want. It makes sense, right? So I think that there's something else going on here with this movie. I think there's either two options. It's either there are shadowy forces that are trying to stall the release of this movie, maybe because there is some groundbreaking information in there. Or, and this is what I think is more likely, they are trying to time the release of the Age of Disclosure with something. I don't know what it is, if it's an event or maybe a big sort of official move that comes from the Congress or the government on the UAP subject. But I think maybe we will hear something about this movie after these upcoming hearings go down. But I really do feel like they are tactically trying to release this documentary at the right time, and whatever it is they're waiting for, whatever it is they're trying to line up with it, it hasn't happened yet. But let's move on to the next thing. So this whole Rendlesham thing came from a two-part question, and actually the first part of the question was just as interesting. So we're going to get into that first, and then we'll get into Rendlesham.
Hello, Ross. Watched your interview with Gary Hesseltine. Fascinating interview. Ross, do you think the Pentagon or some rogue organization funded by black projects is abducting and terrorizing people with the MILABs, military abductions, that happen from time to time? What do you think the purpose of such an operation is and its end goals, if true?
Okay, so there's two issues here. There's the Rendlesham case of December 1980, and there's the issue of what are called MILABs, military abductions. And it's long been a part of UFO, UAP mythology that the US military is somehow secretly involved in abducting people and, for some reason, assisting non-human intelligence beings, entities, in some kind of scientific study or activity with abducted humans. I, for the life of me, don't know if that's true or not. What I can tell you is I've spoken to multiple people who claim to have been victims of MILAB abductions, and I don't know what to make of the abduction phenomenon. I've recently interviewed Jacques Vallée, who has speculated about this in his Forbidden Science journals, and you'll see my interview with Jacques Vallée shortly. What is interesting is there is a commonality, there is a theme to a whole lot of people from all over the world who are describing being in this kind of weird realm where they're allegedly being abducted. There are alien beings there, allegedly, and there are men in uniform, American military uniform. And this isn't just one or two people that have spoken to me about this. This is dozens of people. There's a huge commonality to these reports.
So I found it really interesting that Ross was very unsure about this, about these MILAB abduction cases. Obviously, they are very wild accusations, you know, aliens and American military men working together. He references multiple people having these experiences with non-human intelligence where it feels like they are being operated on or experimented on, and that there are these humans in American military uniforms present in the room. And he seemed like he really didn't want to give an answer there. But what I find really interesting is that it was only about 4 months ago that Ross himself released the interview with Colonel John Blitch. I'm sure we all remember him. You know, the 7-foot praying mantis guy. How could we forget? Well, what's weird is that within like 2 weeks of Ross's interview on NewsNation with Colonel John Blitch, Colonel John Blitch went on Matt Ford's podcast, and he said this.
Sergeant Major Robert O'Dean, I went to him in 2008.
Okay.
And I confronted him at a ufology conference.
And who is this, by the way?
Sergeant Major Robert O'Dean.
Okay.
Who was got famous for talking about this assessment report that he read while he was on staff duty at SHAPE headquarters back in the 60s. I went to him with this heavy heart that I had heard about these military abductions. And I asked him flat out, Sergeant Major, I told him a little bit of my background. And I asked him point blank, is our military involved in any of this? And he looked at the floor, which I was not expecting, because he's always a straight shooter, always looking you straight in the eye. And then he looked up at me and he stared at me straight in the eye and he said, yes. But you got to understand, we had no choice. They were going to do it anyway. And so they allowed us to be observers just to make sure that their claim that they never permanently harmed anybody, they would have to do, some uncomfortable procedures, just like my Labrador Retriever had done at the vet, right? Vets have to cause some pain in order to see where the problem is, because they can't speak to the dogs, right? We haven't developed a telepathic capacity yet, despite the science supporting, peer-reviewed science that says telepathy is real. I mean, that's nothing new. I think Ross mentioned that Any case, he said, yeah, but it was spot checking, and we're partial observers. We are not the ones doing the procedures. I just can't get my head around that. Here you have these guys and gals signing up to sacrifice their lives in defense of this country. No, I have a hard time with that.
So Robert Dean held the highest possible clearance in NATO, and he spoke openly about what he called the assessment, which was basically a report detailing NATO and the military's current understanding of the multiple species of non-human intelligence that were on Earth and interacting with humanity. And there you hear Lieutenant Colonel Dr. John Blitch saying, and he's openly relaying it as fact there, that he spoke to Sergeant Major Robert Dean you can tell by the way he says it there, he saw this man as like a senior authority figure, someone he looked up to, someone who he trusted. And he told him that, yes, the United States does know about these abductions and we're actually complicit in it because this non-human intelligence was going to do it anyway. So to me, that's a deal, right? A deal was struck. That's coming from Sergeant Major Robert Dean, has been relayed to Lieutenant Colonel John Blitch, who's relaying it as if it's fact on these podcasts. And Ross Coulthart spoke to this man only a few weeks prior to this. Now, in Ross's interview, he doesn't make that statement, but I mean, I dare say Ross has been told that. Or if he hasn't, he's probably seen that clip, right? And it's just crazy to me that no one's really talking about that. That this is a guy that he was a Delta Force sniper, Lieutenant Colonel John Blitch. He was in charge of nuclear weapons at one point. Okay, this is a guy on the PRP, and he's on here saying that the United States was complicit in abductions by non-human intelligence. And no one cares. It's crazy, right? Guys, if you want to know more about that in particular, about that connection, go and check out this video of mine. It's a bit of an older video, but it goes right through the John Blitch saga, how it connects to Sergeant Major Robert Dean, and then it goes right into Robert Dean and what his thoughts are about the situation. If you haven't seen it, highly recommend it. It's probably one of my personal favorite videos that I've done, but we'll finish off this one first, and then you can go and check that out. So let's move into the Nuke, Roscoe's Nuke, where he spoke about the US military not just being directly involved in Rendlesham Forest, but responsible for it.
Let's go to Rendlesham. I do think there was American involvement in prompting what happened at Rendlesham Forest in December of 1980. Increasingly, I am led to the view that there was an operation underway. I've been aware for some time that a huge C-5 Galaxy aircraft arrived several weeks before the Rendlesham Forest incident at RAF Woodbridge, which is one of the two Royal Air Force bases that were in use at the time as a joint American-British base. And I'm told that there was a special tarmac set aside that was strengthened for the C-5. Oh, and by the way, it was at the very end of the RAF Woodbridge base, right adjacent to the Rendlesham Forest. And yes, there are witnesses that I'm aware of who, for various reasons, were able to pass through the forest at that time, and they saw activity underway. It has also been suggested to me, and this has been fairly recent, that there was a psionic summoning operation being operated experimentally at Rendlesham at this time, and that what the United States was doing was using people with alleged telepathic psionic abilities to try to summon and perhaps operate a craft, a non-human craft. And it has been suggested to me that what happened at Rendlesham was what's called a link loss, that whoever the psionic was that was operating the craft, they lost the link. And that might explain why the craft landed briefly in the forest and then was able to then be retrieved. It took off eventually whilst allegedly people were watching it, and this happened apparently over multiple nights. I'm intrigued by the Rendlesham case, and I'm looking forward to a film that's being made at the moment called Capel Green, which is going into some of this detail. I'm very excited to be able to see that film, hopefully later in the year. I'm also hoping to talk in more detail to Colonel Charles Holt, who has contacted me recently and expressed an interest in wanting to give more detail on what he knows. Hoping to speak to him shortly, and maybe we can bring him on Reality Check. So yes, my labs are interesting. I don't think Rendlesham was a case of a military alien abduction. What I do think it was, though, was an incident where there was allegedly a psionic link loss. And that's telling, because if it was happening in 1980, that's 45 years ago. 45 years ago, they were using psionics to engage with non-human craft. Think about that. Think about what they might have achieved in the 45 years since.
Wild statements there from Ross. And I haven't seen anyone talking about this yet, but this is just insane, right? If this is true, and let's be real, Ross doesn't just say things, okay? He's got a career in journalism, and, you know, look, people claim that he's compromised and that the people around him are deep state. Who knows? I mean, we can never prove that. But what we can be sure of is that Ross doesn't say something unless he's absolutely pretty sure of it. And this concept of telepathically connecting to a craft and operating it has allegedly been happening inside of the military for over 40 years, if this is true. And what's interesting is that the same kind of language is being used as the Skywatcher team, right? I think in episode 1 of Skywatcher, they talked about this link loss. And they even said that if a craft is taken down with an EMP weapon while a psionic asset is still connected to it telepathically, that it can cause severe cognitive injuries to the person who's connected to it. Like it'll brain damage them because part of their consciousness is in that craft that's been hit with an electromagnetic pulse. And, you know, given the extremely murky history around the Rendlesham Forest incident, the implications of this, if it's true, are just so big that it's hard to fathom, right? Not just because the people involved suffered radiation injuries that affected them for many years, but Jim Penniston is the person who claimed to get a telepathic download of binary code, that he went home and just scribbled zeros and ones, not knowing where it was coming from after this happened. And, you know, that's something that still to this day cannot be explained. Yet the United States potentially not only know the truth about what that means and how that happened, but they're in part responsible for it for some way or another. And that these senior military Air Force officials from the UK who saw this craft that night, who got up close and personal with it, despite all their badges, all their ranks, despite being the people there in person to see it with their very own eyes, were still not in a need to know. They were not allowed to know what they saw. And if this is true, whoever is responsible for it, the United States, or maybe maybe the UK are also involved in it in some way or another, and this really is a transnational operation, that allowing these people to not know the truth about what they had experienced and therefore condemning them to living the rest of their life in, maybe misery probably is a word, but just questioning reality. You know, could you imagine that when you have that visceral firsthand experience and you are left with no answers and you know something about reality isn't right? You know you're not being told the truth. Think about what that does to a person. And to these people, if this is true, it was worth putting that man through that to keep this secret. You know, it means that there is literally a military force that is beyond the conventional military, right? And if this is true, at the very least, it dates back as far as 1980, but I think we can probably say it goes back further than that. And I think people really need to start thinking about the term breakaway civilization and begin to process what that means. It's something that Stephen Greer says, and he gets a lot of shit. Some of it is deserved, but he's also been right about a lot of things. And when we think about it, right, Lou Elizondo just came out the other day holding up a picture of a cornfield. And it's not the first time he's done that, saying it was a UFO, and he was wrong. If Stephen Greer did that, he would be lynched. Okay? He wouldn't survive another day. Stephen Greer is just a civilian. He's just like me and you. Lou Elizondo comes from the government. He comes from counterintelligence. He comes from the very facet of the organization that is responsible for covering all of this up in the first place. Yet somehow he can do this, not only get away with it, but just get a free pass. No one really seems to talk about it. And if you do, it seems like people actually come and harass you for even highlighting the fact that something's up here. Because really, this isn't just about a group of people who decided to go off the grid 80 years ago. It's about a group of people who went off the grid 80 years ago with technology that still, to this day in 2025, would appear like magic to us. Because we haven't been told the truth about reality. It's been kept in secret, in black projects for all this time. And as Ross said, I think if this is true, they did that 80 years ago. Think about how much that technology has changed and developed, and what those people who went off grid all that time ago could be doing now. Thank you guys for tuning in today. If you've learned something from this video, please subscribe, give it a like, share it around. It really makes a big difference in just helping the channel grow. The information is coming in thick and fast, I have to say, but I'm doing my best to keep up. Make sure you guys stay up to date as well. It's crazy times, and I don't think it's going to be slowing down anytime soon. Keep being good to each other. It costs nothing to be kind, guys. Make sure you're getting outside, touch some grass, and I'll see you next time.
Eventually people are going to say, what the hell is going on?
No matter how far you go into the dark, when you flip, you go exactly the same place to the light in our galaxy. Everything. Because everything is in balance. Everything is a polarity.
I think it's just going to get weirder and weirder and weirder, and finally it's going to be so weird that people are going to have to talk